Hello, my name is Jack Heineke, and I'd like to welcome you to today's devotional. Today we're in the book of Proverbs, chapter 4, verses 1 through 7. And it's a lot to read, so hang in there. We'll get to the end of it eventually. Hear, O children, the instruction of a father, and pay attention and be willing to learn so that you may gain understanding and intelligent discernment, for I give you good doctrine. Do not turn away from my instruction. When I was a son with my father David, tender and the only son in the sight of my mother Bathsheba, he taught me and said to me, let your heart hold fast my words, keep my commandments and live. Get skillful in godly wisdom. Acquire understanding. Actively seek spiritual discernment, mature comprehension, and logical interpretation. Do not forget nor turn away from the words of my mouth. Do not turn away from her, wisdom, and she will guard and protect you. Love her, and she will watch over you. The beginning of wisdom is get skillful in godly wisdom. It is preeminent, and with all your acquiring get understanding. Actively seek spiritual discernment, mature comprehension, and logical interpretation. These are the words of Solomon in the book of Proverbs, writing about being raised by his father David and what his father David and his mother Bathsheba both taught him. To get skillful in godly wisdom. That it is preeminent, which means it's of utmost importance. And then with all your acquiring, get understanding, actively seek spiritual discernment, mature comprehension, and logical interpretation. Notice, first of all, what's not being said here, which is to trust your heart, to go on emotional responses and impulses, and state your mind from an emotional standpoint. It says, seek spiritual discernment, mature comprehension, and logical interpretation. God gave us brains to use, obviously, and He wants us to use those brains logically, rationally, and not just emotionally all the time. So today, once again, it's Proverbs Saturday. That's why we got into this proverb. But I want to first off start off just by laying a foundation about myself and what I believe in reference to this proverb, in reference to what's happening in the world with the Supreme Court of the United States overturning the Roe versus Wade verdict. I just want to say this. First off, I am a Christian. I'm a Christian who believes in God and who also believes the words of the Bible are God's words. I'm also pro-life. I believe that abortion for women's rights, well, that's just not right. Certainly not for killing an unwanted child as a method of birth control or to exercise women's rights. I also believe in equal rights for everyone, including women, and the issue of women's rights is an important issue in our world. Definitely, obviously, and that's something I would stand on the front lines and fight with you for. But the use of abortion for birth control is something I disagree with. And part of the reason why I disagree with it is that the rights of the child in the womb to be brought into the world, I believe, is equal to all of our rights. I don't believe that a woman or a man have greater rights than a child in the womb does. I do believe that abortion is necessary in some rare cases, but from what I just wrote as a man, many of you may believe that I have no right and no say over abortion. We all have our opinions. And quite frankly and quite honestly, you're welcome to dismiss, cancel, or unfriend me because of any of my opinions on anything. That's not what's important to me. What's important to me is to challenge you to consider what God has to say on any subject whatsoever. That is, if you're interested and willing to listen to what God has to say on anything, and what God has to say on the application of wisdom is of utmost importance in our lives, because it uses logical, rational thinking and thinking things through. It shouldn't be surprising or offensive to any of God's followers that actual godly wisdom is not a priority for many in our world. It doesn't take higher levels of the operation of discernment to watch the news and the response to the news to determine that godly wisdom is just not that big of a priority in the lives of perhaps most people. The lack of the exercising of godly wisdom is pretty much what I see when I see these things taking place, and although it is unnerving to a small degree, it is expected, unfortunately. The Bible itself has addressed many times the opposition to godliness in the streets of the world. It uses the truth of this worldly condition as a mirror to display the futility and the self-destructive tendencies of those who do not even consider God in their day-to-day lives, as a warning and a reminder to followers of God to make developing and using wisdom as a major priority in our thinking and in our behaviors. The wisdom of God that comes through these words in the Bible, in my mind, are literally priceless, as they perform a work within me that no other words from anyone else can accomplish. That God cares so much for us to include His loving instructions on wisdom in the Bible is an incredible way for God to reach us today and to instruct us on how to treat one another and how to respond to events. Absolutely displays His caring love for us. And as followers of God, we should utilize this wisdom when we begin to feel that sting of offense within us towards those in the world who do not follow godly wisdom. We should feel grateful that God's wisdom has had the impact it has had on us. The world's response shows me where I used to be once and where I would still be without the intervention of God into my life. I also should not be offended because the world is operating exactly as it is supposed to. If a person is not being led by God, then that person should not be expected to respond as a person who places godly wisdom as a priority in how they operate in the world. Yes, it can be absolutely frustrating and maddening to watch what we see going on, but God warned us to expect this behavior from the world. With God, there is no shock or surprise, since He is omniscient and knows all that happens well before it happens. God longs to bring us into His kingdom where He shows us His wisdom and how to apply that wisdom in an unwise world that is supposed to be an unwise world. In this proverb, Solomon once again is reflecting on the godly wisdom he gained from his father, once again who was King David, from his mother Bathsheba, who were both guilty of adultery, but were not so far gone because of their sin that God couldn't teach them His wisdom so that they could teach others. In order to hear wisdom, we need to shut off everything else and pay close attention in order to comprehend these words, and then ponder them, meditate on them, pray on them to be a part of our thinking and behaviors. Hear the teachings of our fathers. Be teachable always. Never ever make the immature mistake of thinking you've mastered anything in life. In order to have understanding and intelligent discernment in your mind readily available at all times, that must be preceded by many hours of contemplation of these words. This right here is good doctrine that should never be turned away from, but embraced and displayed to the world, whether the world likes it or not. Hold tightly to these words and make sure that they are imprinted deep into your heart. Actively seek after spiritual discernment, mature comprehension, and logical interpretation. Another warning he gives us to not forget this and to never ever turn away from it. Because in order to be protected and guarded, wisdom needs to have its rightful place in that person's mind and life. Wisdom will tell you how to respond in a godly way to people who need God more than they need your emotional, immature responses. When you read the words of this psalm here today, did you read that we are to throw a temper tantrum when we are disappointed or frustrated over getting news that we don't like? Are we supposed to follow the worldly crowds that vie for attention and sympathy over their plight and, quite frankly, behave as petulant children instead of wise grown-ups? Does God instruct us to take to the street to protest or to even engage in any ungodly attitudes or behaviors to support what is in itself an ungodly act? Does God tell us to post to social media our being offended over how this country or this world isn't acting as godly as we think they should? Keep in mind, the audience of the entire Bible is not the world. The audience was for the Jews and for the Christians. The Bible wasn't written for the world to follow. It was written to Christians and Jews to follow. So if you're easily offended by the world, I suggest you reevaluate who those words were meant for. Every single one of us are all sinners. If we've been saved by grace, then shouldn't we be praying for those in the world just as Jesus did from the cross when he said, "Father, forgive them, they know not what they do." If anyone ever had any right to be offended, it was Jesus. But he did not once respond as an offended person or an offended God. He took it all upon himself. The full weight of our sin as he became sin and was punished for sin that was not his, but was ours. The awareness of this should humble us and not embolden our egos to be offended by a world that he adequately warned about, that they would hate us because they hate him. We live in perilous times, and each tick of the clock is a tick closer to being in that place that he made for us. Therefore, we need his wisdom in how we are to respond to a world that hates him. And in that respect, there's really nothing going on in the world today that's any different than it was any other day. I pray that you're blessed by this, and I pray that you have an awesomely blessed day. His will in this world. I pray that you have an awesomely blessed day.